Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ellen Massell, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, what do we first think about when we hear the keyword teenager or adolescent? Now, there's a whole lot of different reactions out there that are positive, but there are some negative connections with adolescence, like creating chaos, getting in trouble, and sometimes even violence. But this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation, and what may occur with one teenager doesn't necessarily mean the whole group are exactly the same. We're joined by Psychologist and Research Director at University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Dan Romer, and we're going to be talking about some of the social views in adolescent stereotypes. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, and for our audience, I'd love to know what your role is in building some understanding for parents in adolescent behaviors that sort of look into those stereotypes.
So, a lot of the work we do involves interviewing adolescents themselves. We do surveys and we find out how they feel about all kinds of things, in particular what media they use, how they feel about political issues, how they feel about their school, do they have any emotional problems? And from that, we can draw a lot of conclusions about what's going on with adolescence at any particular point in time. And like what we were just talking earlier about, how do people react to a TV streaming occasion like 13 Reasons Why? So we were interested in how did teenagers or young people react to that? So we did a survey and, explored that. So and then of course we look at in particular what the media is doing in terms of how it portrays young people, and also any kind of stereotypes that the media cultivates as well are things we're interested in. But the other side of it too is we're interested in how scientists like developmental psychologists treat adolescents. And in recent years, we took issue with the way they were doing that. They were using data about the brain that were very, hard to understand and hard to draw conclusions from. But they were more than willing to take data that were not all that clear and say, this is evidence that the adolescent has an unbalanced brain. It's not fully developed. They can't make good decisions. They're driven by emotion. They don't have cognitive control. All these different stereotypes started to infiltrate how we looked at brain data. And so we had to go look at the brain data and say, hey guys, you're misinterpreting, using data, you're misinterpreting what adolescents are really about and imposing your own stereotypes. And these are stereotypes that have been around forever. I mean, you go back and look at the literature, the very first study or review that was done about adolescence was done in 1904 by a psychologist named G. Stanley Hall. And I actually have the title of that, which just will give you a sense. So it was published in 1904, and the title was Adolescence, Its Psychology and Its Relations to Physiology, Anthropology, Sociology, Sex, Crime, Religion, and Education. Mm-hmm. So, where does the sex and the crime? Why is that in the title?
Yeah.
And what came out of that was the view that adolescence is a period of. This was the first real definition of adolescence as a developmental period, and it came to be called a period of storm and stress, primarily for parents, I think, more so. I mean, it was storm and stress for the adolescent in many cases, but it was for parents as well. And so over time, this stereotype has just lingered. And it goes back way before Hall. You can read Aristotle, and he'll say, young people, they're driven by emotion. They don't know enough to really use reason yet. So this is old. I mean, this is not, but psychologists have also picked up on it, and neuroscientists, and the way we treat adolescents, is not particularly respectful, I would say.
Yeah.
Of them and that stage of life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one of the most common stereotype that I hear, and I got when I was a teenager as well, which is only not that long ago, it was the fact that we didn't know anything, that we haven't experienced the world, that we haven't looked into the world, that we don't know about ourselves, or they'll say that, oh, you'll know it when you get older, or you see it when you get older, or you experience it when you get older. And I think like that was the part of adolescence that really annoyed me, is the fact that they think that we have so much inexperience because we're not really looking into it, that we're not really experiencing it yet. At the same time, there are a lot of kids who probably experience more than some adults do, or they have a lot more influence than some adults do, or they learn a lot faster than some. And it's interesting because I always hated being a teenager just because it was never taken seriously, because I was never taken as a person who has experienced the world and seen things in her own way. Maybe not directly, but some people who see things directly still didn't experience things in a way that can be taken differently, or in a different viewpoint than a teenager has. And that was the thing. And I think a lot of teenagers still sort of feel that way, in terms of, it's the most common stereotype I think that comes around, is the fact that we don't know what we're talking about, or that we will figure things out when we get older. So looking into our conversation today, I think this is going to hopefully, like the aim of this for me is to hopefully sort of show that teenagers do know more than what they're sharing, or what they're showing, or what a lot of parents think that their teenagers know. And hopefully today we can sort of help some parents understand that a little bit more, and help teenagers understand the fact that they aren't the only ones who are sort of experiencing those stereotypes. And that your role as well as a policy maker and sort of looking into that is definitely going to be one of those roles that is very important in terms of changing the viewpoint that a lot of teenagers are sort of set upon.
Yeah. Well, I hope I can do that. I mean, I try, and I get emails from young people saying, why don't you do more, to try to disabuse people of all these stereotypes. And, well, the pandemic just kind of took over a lot of what we were doing, trying to figure out what was going on with that. So there was a little bit of an interruption in my research on adolescence, primarily looking at how to cope with the pandemic. And we looked at also, what happened with adolescents, which was wasn't all that great for them, to get, not go to school, not be with their peers, having to do it all online. That's got to be disruptive. And we've seen that, it was painful. But on the other hand, we also saw some things that helped. First of all, the internet helped. I mean, it was, saving grace in many ways, because people could, actually see each other and talk, and, all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we also saw that schools that had better climates, and this is something I think is really important, is school climate, they seem to do better during the pandemic, at least in in some studies we've seen, they were less distraught and sort of isolated. They felt more like a part of the school community, despite the fact they weren't there. Mm-hmm. And so I think, we forget that parents are important, but all the other institutions that kids, spend time in, especially schools, are extremely important. And they're just an extension of what parents can do. And so parents don't do it alone. They have to rely on teachers and coaches and trainers and all kinds of other people who come into the lives of adolescents, mm-hmm. To help them pursue their interests. And adolescents are like, you got to think of them as like looking at the world, with fresh eyes. They're looking at the world without all of that baggage that adults have, So they can say, wow, climate change, what are you doing? Or they can say, in this country, gun violence, how can you allow people to have all these guns? And, they're just like looking at the world through fresh eyes. And their inexperience is actually, a benefit. It's actually a virtue.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think I'm 25 now, dealing with so much of adult situations, and the whole idea of, because in Australia, you have to vote. There's no oh, maybe you can, maybe you don't have to. There's a regulation that you have to vote. And the amount of stuff that I've had to pay attention to in order to figure things out, I so wish that I paid attention to it when I was younger, or that I dealt, because now you're looking at it from a political lens rather than okay, what's good for the people kind of lens. If I was younger, there's so many different ways that you would look about it. And it's so interesting how much you sort of look into how is it going to benefit us as adults rather than how is it going to benefit people? How is it going to benefit I'm looking at how is it going to benefit the economy? That's the worst part to look at it. That's the way that you look at it and as an adult, how is it going to affect me as an adult, rather than how is it going to affect the little kids that are still having to grow up in the world? There's so many different ways that you can look about it, and their inexperience, like you said, inexperience is probably the best way to sort of grow the world into what we want it to be. But because they're not taken seriously, it's not taken as a benefit from that. And it's that is the biggest concern I think a lot of not just parents, but a lot of teenagers face as well. It's they know what the world is from what they see it as, not from what they're taught. And what they see, their first view into the world is that you end up being an adult, you lose so much of your own imagination. You lose so much of your own dreams and wishes because you're so focused on surviving as an adult. And I used to go to my dad for friendship problems, for little tiny things. Now I'm going to him can you help me with taxes? Can you help me with figure things out? My focus now is just pretty much surviving rather than where can I go to enjoy my life as an adult who's paying for my adult life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Really is.
Yeah.
And, that I think having to vote is an interesting difference. We don't have that. And so I imagine, is it 18 that you can start to vote in Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 18-year-olds probably have a lot of work to do to figure out what to go with that.
Yes. I did not like that transition, I will say. I had to pay more attention to the world, which was a lot more, for an 18-year-old who just barely graduated of high school, there's a whole lot of stuff that you're having to pay attention to. And it's it's interesting because suddenly your voice matters, or the things that you say actually matter. And from 17 to 18, that transition is so varied as to whether you're going to make a difference or whether you're going to be a part of the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of adolescents have to make that decision, and often their parents uh, don't see that as an important thing. They sort of think, well, I want my kid to go to school, go to college, get a job, to, succeed in life, and mainly do what other people are doing, not what they want to do.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's conflict there
Yeah.
in that regard. And again, it stems from lack of respect and confidence in this judgment of the adolescent, because the adolescent has quite a lot of experience already, especially an 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old. Been around a
Exactly.
while. Yeah. And
Exactly.
seeing the world from their perspective and may not match what the parents are thinking. And the parents, to their credit, they've had to, like you say, figure out things, how to survive.
Mhm.
And so for them, they're probably a little anxious for their 18-year-olds, like, I got through it, but will that person get through it? Will my
Exactly.
son or daughter get through it? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So, before we go even further, I'd love to go to know some of your recommendations. And I know that you spoke about this a little bit earlier when it comes to some books that you have recommended. So, do you have do you have any books that you would recommend a lot of our viewers to read or to even look up?
I do. So I have two in particular. So one thing I would say is that a lot of the books that are aimed at parents um, focus on how how to control or cope with your adolescent. And in this uh, through the lens of that this kid is a problem. How do I deal with the fact that my adolescent is always criticizing me or or is unhappy with things, or is doing things I don't like or don't want. That's what a lot of the self-help literature is about.
Yeah.
But I wanted to highlight two books, and I've actually met one of the authors and I've talked to the other. So I actually know these people, and I have great respect for them, and I think they're very good.
Okay.
So one is about the internet and digital devices and how to cope with that. And the book is called Technology's Child, Digital Media's Role in the Age and Stages of Growing Up. And it's by a psychologist named Katie Davis. And the book is published by MIT Press here in the States.
Mhm.
And what she does is she goes all the way through the life cycle um, of a young person up through young adulthood, and talks about how um, digital devices can be used by kids at various ages in a beneficial way. And she also, of course, talks about some of the problems, but she gives a much more balanced view of how we can use digital tools and devices maximally to enhance development and enable young people to flourish, to find who they are, pursue their interests, their passions, and do it in a way that is as safe as possible for them. And I think it's a nice, very nice book for that. And she's a great writer, easy to read, and it's good for a parent who has a kid at any age, really,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting in and of itself. Then another book is by a psychologist named Lisa D'Amour, and she's an American psychologist. She has a practice, so she does talk to teenagers who are troubled. But she has a recent book called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers,
Okay.
Have you heard of it?
I don't think I have, but I'm
Okay.
making note of everything.
Yeah. So this book just came out in the last year.
Okay.
It's had other books. I found this one to be very level-headed. And the message really is that your teenager really only wants you meddling when they want it on their terms.
Mhm.
So don't try to tell them, you should do this and you should do that. Let them come to you. And if you have a good relationship with your son or daughter, they will then come to you when they have an issue that they think you can solve for them or help them with. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is a lot of it, especially for females, is just venting. You know,
I know that.
yeah, I mean, it's therapeutic. Just listen when they talk about a problem they're having, and don't try to say, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. Try to listen and say, yeah, that's really awful. How did you get through that? And that's therapeutic in and of itself. But, you know, I've talked to her. I think she doesn't play enough of the role of encouraging problem solving, which is another strategy, another coping strategy that young people can use, everyone uses. So she's very big on venting and not trying to micromanage young person. Let them, and if you have, and, you know, of course, cultivate a respectful relationship so that the young person feels comfortable talking to the parent. And so I think it's, she's been on the radio here talking about her book, and I think she's really good. So I would recommend those two in particular.
No, they sound really amazing. I think especially when it comes to the whole idea of, like, I talk about micromanaging so much on this show because I think a lot of parents, they find that they need to protect the child. In order to protect them, they have that idea that, okay, if I tell them how to do this, then they'll be able to do this. Then they'll be able to manage it. But yeah, micromanaging is probably a big thing because it's so beneficial for the parent, but it has no benefit for the child or for the teenager who's going through it. And it's interesting because I've had a firsthand experience of being micromanaged as a teenager. And then, like, I speak to my mom about this all the time, and we have a good relationship now. But back then there was just that whole idea of, if I don't do exactly the way that she does it, then I'm not doing it right. And I never got to figure out how my way of doing something is, or how my way of cooking is going to be. So I didn't learn to cook until I was about 22 because I never did it right according to her. I never did it the way that she wanted me to do it. So it's interesting at how deep micromanaging sort of goes in terms of their relationship with the child. And I speak about my mom and my micromanaging partnership fairly often on the show because it's so deep rooted into how much it affects a teenager later on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure there's been research on it. I don't know. There's definitely, the relationship between the teen and the parent is a huge factor in so much of what can go right and what can go wrong. So, yeah, and micromanaging, I found her book very interesting in that regard, about how to avoid that under some
Yeah. Well, it's definitely on my list now. I'm adding both of those to a list because it sounds very interesting. And I love sort of self-help books that aren't self-help in a way, like they aren't so focused on this is an issue, this is how you need to solve it. They're sort of like, this is what a lot of people are facing, and this is maybe what you can look into even further. So I love books that sort of look into that, which is great. So I'm adding those two to my list for sure.
Well, tell me, I look forward to hearing from you about what you think of them after.
I definitely will. I definitely will. It's probably going to be in my January list because my November and December lists are full.
Whatever.
So what movie have you recently enjoyed that you feel you want to talk about?
Enjoy is a funny word. I think the one that I just recently saw was very upsetting. The Robert De Niro movie about how the Indian population, or a particular Indian tribe in Oklahoma, was treated back in the 1920s. That was very upsetting. But I also saw another movie called Bottoms. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that was also kind of interesting. It explored a the possibility that this is again female teens could retaliate against the stereotypes about sexual orientation, differences in sexual orientation in young women. And it was kind of a protest type movie. But I think the one that really is most fun to talk about is Barbie. I mean, you had to watch it. And of course, it was a huge phenomenon. And it really did highlight all the female stereotypes that women have to face, and did it in a very, humorous and enjoyable way. So I think in terms of recent films, that one I would say stands out particularly. Yes. Yeah.
No, that film is amazing. I love that while it focuses on Barbie, it also looks so deeply into Ken as well. Like it looks into the male stereotype of like how young boys sort of see men later on in life and how they're influenced by a lot of the pressure of what it is to be a man, which is also really interesting for me because it was like, well, okay, yes, I cried in the female parts because I completely related to all of it. It was also like so deeply looking into the issues revolving men, and how teenage boys sort of see what a man is supposed to be, whether a man is going to be like Ken or whether a man is going to be like the other male character that was there. I forgot his name now, but like it showed the whole different way. Are you going to be a Ken or are you going to be him? Are you going to be someone that's like so deep rooted in being what a masculine man is supposed to be? Or are you going to be someone that is, so accepting of all the different ways that Barbie wants to change or Barbie wants to be herself or the different ways that Barbie is going to exist? So yeah, it was really interesting. Like I will talk about, I can probably go 2 hours just talking about this movie as it is, because every time I talk about it, I just get so deeply invested in how much it changed, how much it opened up so many different viewpoints into how Barbie and Ken are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I found some of the depictions of Ken very funny. And also, that whole scene where they were fighting. I mean, so men are supposed to fight, I mean, it's so funny. And then they're supposed to rule the roost, they're supposed to take over the house and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great satire. And also very easy to swallow. And, so I thought it was great. I just loved it.
Yeah. And I know that we spoke about this a little bit earlier and we sort of like started getting into the topic a little bit more. But when it comes to the stereotypes, like I know we've mentioned that a little bit earlier as well, the stereotypes that sort of can exist. What are some of the most common stereotypes or misconceptions that a lot of teenagers sort of face?
Well, you've mentioned some of them, that adults think they don't know anything. And there's a side of that, like all stereotypes, there's a side of the stereotype that has some validity, which is adolescents haven't done a lot of things yet. They're still learning, They haven't driven, they haven't had a romantic relationship. Well, they haven't had to choose a course in high school. There's a lot of things they haven't done. And so they're still exploring and learning. And so adolescence is a learning period. And if you frame it as, well, they don't know anything, that's really the wrong way to think about it. The way to think about it is, what can I do to help you learn? The things you want to learn. And make it as painless as possible, because learning is painful many times. You're going to end up making bad choices, and you have to learn from them. And the only way to learn from them is to go out and do them. So you have to go find a partner if you have a romantic interest in someone, and you have to try that out. If you're going to learn to drive, you have to get behind the wheel, and you may actually end up, having to put on the brakes real hard because you almost hit somebody. You may take a course that you end up hating. There's all these things you're doing. Voting, voting's a huge issue that you're doing for the first time. And so adults sort of, treat adolescents like, they're sort of not, not ready for prime time, which in a certain sense is true. But at the same time, you have to realize that this is an opportunity. It's a period of opportunity. So for the parent to help the adolescent, find their passion and find their interests and do what's healthy for them and not necessarily do what the parent thinks is the best. There's going to be a conflict there. And I think a lot of teens have that problem. And we see that now, especially that, we've seen more, especially in the U.S. now, we've seen, sexual differences in sexual orientation, differences in gender identity. These are all coming to the fore now, whereas before they were kind of swept under the rug. And it's still not easy for adolescents who are divergent, both sexually and in orientation and identity, and also, in neurodevelopment. It's when they're divergent and parents don't understand or appreciate that, their peers don't understand and appreciate it. We see, higher levels of depression and suicidality in teens who are divergent in these respects. At least here in the U.S. I don't know what's going on in Australia, but and it's painful to really see it because they're just trying to find out who they are, and that's something, exploring is risky. It's risky. Let's face it. The other thing is a lot of the things that are risky, parents don't. The popular culture doesn't regard as something to try to encourage. So, taking a course that's new or learning a new skill, those aren't considered risky. Those are just, ordinary behaviors, but they're just as risky as, going to a party and maybe drinking an alcoholic drink for the first time. That's also a learning experience. And doing things like going out for a sport or, dating somebody. These are all risky. These are all risky things. And we don't focus on those so much. We focus on things that are anxiety provoking for parents. And those tend to be, sex, drugs, hanging out with the wrong peers, and unfortunately being divergent. If a child is divergent in some way, that's also regarded as, you're never going to have a good life, and don't do that, that kind of thing. So teens have a lot of things to confront.
Yeah, I think especially the idea also about wanting to make their parents proud or wanting to make people, they're so focused around also the idea of, I know a lot of teenagers are so focused on, okay, I need to make them proud. I need to make them see that the risk that I'm taking isn't something that's going to lead me into a bad position, or isn't, if I'm sort of risking a whole lot of things to pursue music, for example, and they're in a band and all these different risks involved, like they're sort of focusing less on school and focusing more on music. There's a risk that they could fail one thing but do well in the other. But that's a risk that a lot of parents are scared that the teenager is going to make. And if something fails, then school is not going to be there anymore. And there's so many things that come up as a risk that I'm not really sure how much, looking into it, what's the distinction between taking a risk that is really bad or a risk that is sort of helping them grow and helping them understand their life? Is there a distinct difference between the two?
Yeah, I think there are risk behaviors, unfortunately, that some adolescents become enthralled with that reflect problems in their lives. So we certainly don't like having an adolescent become addicted, for example, to a drug. That's definitely not something we want as a parent or society-wise. So we have to try to understand how that happens and why it happens and come to grips with it. But a lot of these other types of risk-taking are things that parents have to just, I think, accept as normal part of growing up. And, you know, if a teenager finds exciting and gets passionate feelings out of becoming a musician, the irony is today, more so than ever, you can go on TikTok.
Yep.
I mean, you know, you don't have to have an album. You don't have to go through the old structures in order to make a living. You can go online and play music or, you know, do all kinds of things that in the old days would not have been conceivable. So in a sense, the world, the digital world today is actually, I think, more inviting for young people to find out who they are. And certainly if they're divergent, it's a place to find others like you.
Yeah.
And so the internet has turned out to have some very good features. On the other hand, it also has some features that are not so great. And that's where we worry. We worry that, you know, a teen is going to become so depressed that they're going to take the advice of somebody on the internet to harm themselves, for example. We've studied that. It's not very good. So I think that the real bottom line is this going to go somewhere that's ultimately going to be unhealthy? And we have to realize that sometimes kids are going to try things that they're just going to try. They're not going to, you know, become addicted or become suicidal. I mean, they're just going to try things, and we have to give them that space to do that with, again, you know, being there and being ready to hear the things that don't work and say, yeah, that's really bad. I don't know how could that happen? And then if they want your help, give it to them. And I think that's a challenge. I mean, it's parents by nature are, you know, nurturant and caring, and they want their children to be taken care of in a way that, you know, they maybe weren't, or that they want them to succeed in ways that the teen doesn't particularly want to succeed. So these are conflicts that are difficult. But I think there's a lot of things that are risky that are very adaptive and functional, and we just don't focus on them as much when it comes to adolescence. We focus on these negative things that we worry about.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned a really good point when it comes to posting online. I know kids sort of like don't really think about the security part to it and being safe on the internet and things like that. But I know parents focus too much on there, where there is sort of like a sense that your child shouldn't be on the internet, shouldn't post things on the internet. I grew up with a lot of my friends who just weren't allowed Facebook, weren't allowed any sort of social media. And it got to a point where she felt like she was missing out on a lot of things, that she made a fake Facebook and hid it from her parents. Like, there's so much that is just, kids will always find a way to do it, whether a parent says yes or no, whether a parent agrees with it or not. And it's so interesting because that was a huge risk, especially from, you know, in a cultural background. There's that whole idea that you're supposed to do exactly what your parent says. You're supposed to follow instructions to a T. And if you don't do that, and if you're caught out doing something completely against it, you're pretty much grounded for life. It's at that point. And it's, so that whole idea of taking a risk, especially in, you know, any different background that you have, whether you have conservative parents or strict parents, there's that whole idea of, it's more the adrenaline rush that sort of takes part when you do the risk. So it's like, it's more fun when you do it. It's more interesting when you're taking a risk, rather than when you have parents that you can talk about things completely. You have parents who sort of allow their child to take part in a lot of activities or take part in things that most parents wouldn't but they're able to talk to you. There's a way that children are more likely to not create as much of harm for themselves as parents originally think. That's sort of my view on it, because I've grown up with two different types of friends, one whose parents sort of were able to talk about sort of this drama that's happening at school, social media drama, like all of that. They were able to have parents to talk to. And then I grew up with friends who had a parent that was far too strict and didn't allow, you're meant to do ABC and this is what it is. And they grew up completely different. One grew up like still being very sheltered, but she was online majority of the time. And one who grew up being very comfortable in who she is and being able to sort of express. And it's interesting to sort of see how much of a risk is a risk if it's going to stop the relationship between a parent and a child, which is always really interesting for me to sort of look into, which is why this topic is far too fascinating for me.
Well, we've also found that the risks of online, of getting submerged online and spending too much time is very often related to having a poor relationship with parents. It's a risk factor because the teen will withdraw from the parent. And one way to withdraw is to go online and do stuff there. The other thing is kids who are depressed or anxious. I know you had one of the topics you wanted to talk about. That's another thing that the research is finding is that kids who are, and this has been known for a long time, that kids who are depressed and anxious are more likely, for example, to use drugs. And the same is true for excessive use of the internet, because this is a coping. It's if you're spending more time on the internet or using a drug than you are doing things that other people find exciting, like, doing a sport or joining a drama club or learning an instrument or, whatever it might be that would give people pleasure and help them figure out who they are. Being on the internet or using drugs is not going to help them figure out who they are. And
very true.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, being depressed and having parents who are unsympathetic and probably partly involved in not necessarily encouraging the depression, but not helping, are much more likely to be, overly engaged in activities that are not healthy. And we've known this for a long time, but I don't think we've fully appreciated it in terms of what we can do to help young people. We focus so much, like the whole drug thing. The U.S. spent more money on trying to get kids not to use drugs than they did on any other activity, that the government funded. They spent millions and millions every year. And instead, they ignored the mental health of kids and tried to figure out how can we help kids to either cope with their mental health issues or even get them treated if they have them. But, we didn't structure the world in such a way that kids could feel like they have a good future ahead, that, the world is going to turn out okay. Mm-hmm. Kids who are depressed, they just don't think that's going to happen. They don't have a very optimistic view of the future. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason for that is the environments they're in are putting them down, either their parents or the schools or the media. And we need to think harder about how our communities and our cultures can be sensitive, to how we can help young people feel they have a positive future and not get depressed about their situation. Yeah. And if they are, how do we get them help? But that's also another issue, a whole conundrum, because stigmatized and, parents don't want their kids going to therapy and there aren't enough therapists anyway. So,
Exactly.
So it's a real problem, that part of, the unhappiness of being an adolescent.
And
which is what Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just so interesting to me because when you're talking about the government funded on like dealing with depression, dealing with things, do you talk about dealing with it after the problem has already occurred and after it's already further deeper than you can imagine? Meanwhile, there are kids who are younger, sort of developing that problem to begin with. And you don't, a lot of like government policies and government funded things are looking into situations after the situation has gone to a point where it's going to cost more money to fix it. While there are children who are developing that problem that they can go and also spend money on to sort of find activities that are going to make a child feel like they can live again or feel like they can do something outside of the normal structure of homeschool, which is pretty much what the whole structure of society is as a teenager, is that you go home, you go to school, you sometimes go to work, and then there's this checklist of what you're supposed to do. So you're ignoring the fact that there is a child who wants to, for example, go to do music lessons, but the parents can't afford to take the kid music lessons. So the kid gets to not enjoy life, whereas that could be like something that the government helps funding for when it comes to, okay, if they can't afford to go music lessons, we can go and somehow have like a fundraiser or some sort of funding that sort of allows children to take it outside of school that make a child enjoy life a little bit more or feel like there's a reason that they can do things other than, oh, okay, I'm just going to do school. I just got to do homework and I got to go back again. Like that's their routine. And you don't get any freedom pretty much or any choice of what to do until you're out there earning your own money and able to fund yourself. But by then it's too late to do anything other than that whole checklist that you do in your 20s that you pretty much need to have your life figured out by the time you're 30 in today's society. That's pretty much how your teens and your 20s sort of seems like it's going, where it's like you have freedom when you're retired, when you're finished everything. That's when you get to travel the world. That's when you get to figure out. And there are some few who were able to sort of see outside that, but majority of us are hardly ever looking at it from, oh, you get to see the world outside when you're in your teens, or you get to travel around. Like it seems like a dream that you're able to sort of enjoy something that you're seeing, unless you grew up in a privileged life where you're able to do that. So the thing that you realize as you get older is that everything is money. That enjoying life costs money. Enjoying life is something that is needed to have the privilege to enjoy it, rather than you work hard and then pretty much that's your life. So it's interesting to sort of talk about policies and sort of look into how the world sort of works from a viewpoint that's sort of outside before the problem sort of even exists.
Yeah, well, I think, just the points you raise about music, for example, schools can do a lot about that. Schools, in the U.S., it's only the wealthy schools that can afford to have drama and music. Mm-hmm. Schools that where people, are lucky to be able to even go to school, like they're not dealing with issues at home or in the neighborhood. We don't put enough resources into ways that kids can, enjoy themselves and find things that they find exciting, and I think that's a real shortcoming of our cultures and our whole like community organization. We sort of let communities, fend for themselves when a lot of them can't, and we really need. There's a model that I'm particularly interested in now. It's called the Icelandic prevention model. Mm-hmm. So Iceland, I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, but I don't think I have.
Yeah. So it's not fully thought through, but I think it's got the germ of an idea, which back in around 2000, Iceland had a huge drug problem with their teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, we got to do something. So they created a national program that was funded by the government, but it was directed and organized at the local level. And the idea was every community would decide what it was they needed to give kids a better experience in school, more things to do,
Mm-hmm.
leisure activities that were equitable. Everybody could do them. It wasn't just the kids better off. And make the school a welcoming place. I don't know if they did drama and music, but I think that would be consistent. And they found a dramatic decline in drug use. I mean, the kids just, they didn't need to use drugs. They had a community that fostered engagement in activities. They did leisure activities. They liked going to school. The whole community was flourishing. And this model has now been disseminated, and it's being tried both here in the U.S. It's being tried in Australia, I believe, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the way to go. I think if we have resources so that teachers, coaches, other sources of engagement and opportunity within our communities, this really will help. And then this will help adolescents who are looking for things that, aside from academic, aside from, doing well in calculus. Maybe they don't want to do well in calculus. Maybe they want to play an instrument, or maybe they want to start a club on something. And we need those opportunities for kids. And I think even now with the internet, it's not even that hard to imagine having, a certain amount of livelihood if you can go online and show people things that you can do or say. It's far more open than it used to be. And I think it would improve the mental health of kids, because they wouldn't feel, like they have to do, the academics, or they have to do what their parents want. They can do things that the community supports.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is the school climate. School climates, I think, are really important. And there's a lot of research to back that up. And that's something we should be funding. We should be funding efforts to train teachers to create a positive school climate so that all the kids feel respected. They don't get subject to bullying or ostracism. And, an environment like that is what we need for kids. And we sort of let the rich people have it, and everybody else, and even the rich people have their issues, but everyone else kind of has to fend for themselves. And I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah. No, I think you're talking about earlier as well about social media. And I think we were talking about the pandemic as well. Like, there's such a huge point where I sort of noticed how great social media was. Like, for example, how TikTok was, and building a community of people who engaged in, yes, it's like, it sounds stupid to a lot of adults who are sort of like, oh, it's a dance. You're doing a dance and you're posting it online. But the amount of people, the amount of teenagers, the amount of kids that sort of joined in and pretty much created this community of, okay, we're going to do a dance each week throughout the last 2 years of COVID. They're doing something that's not only moving around, so they're engaging their bodies, but they're also engaging their mental health in remembering all these different steps. This is something to focus on. This is something to enjoy each week. And they have, I know that there's this one page who was creating dances each week, and then the kids would learn it throughout the week and then follow it, and they'd have to post about it by the end of the week. And that's 2 years of that continuous movement. It's so interesting to see how much they were able to sort of engage with people from all over the world and learn about so many different kinds of people, so many different types of people, so many different races, religions, cultures. It was such a cool thing to witness. And it also made me download TikTok. So like that's a great phenomenon in itself, because I was so interested in Instagram that I could not do another social media app. But then it's so incredible how engaging everyone was and how accepting TikTok was of like everyone. Yes, it had its bullies, it had it, and it still definitely does now. I mean, it has cyber attacks and things like that, but it's so great to see people communicate with each other, especially for those introverts who can't really do face-to-face communication, or the people who couldn't leave the house, or agoraphobics who can't leave the house at all. Like, it brings so much of the community together, not just community as in your next door neighbor or in your area, but people from halfway across the world, and seeing how engaging it was. Like, I love the idea of how engaging social media is. Like, it has its negatives, of course, like everything, but it has so much positives for a teenager who's barely able to think about positive things. It gave such a positive perspective for a lot of teenagers, which was fascinating to sort of be on the direct view of.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the downside, of course, to that is that for the kids who are like spending all their time on TikTok, that's saying, you know, boy, their lives are not so happy that they go there, you know, 8 hours a day. You know,
Yes.
that's sad. But for the most people, you know, I think you're right. It's a great eye opener, and you know, there's so much connection that's possible with social media, and like anything else, you know, overdoing it can be a problem, and I think and parents sometimes are part of the problem. Unfortunately, I don't want to criticize parents in particular, but they can be part of the problem. Unfortunately. Yeah.
So with that being said, what are some practical steps that parents can sort of take to better support adolescents, sort of in that journey of exploring themselves, or even finding that growth and making mistakes?
Yeah. So, you know, I saw that question, and it made me think of what kids say about their school and their relationship with their teachers. And let me read you what some of the things are that are in a very popular school climate survey that teenagers will say makes them feel good about their school, and especially in relation to the teachers. So everything that they say about their teachers are things that they probably would say if they had a good relationship with their parent. So the teacher is just an extension. Okay, so here's some of these things. So teachers understand my problems. Teachers and staff seem to, they take a real interest in my future. Teachers are available when I need to talk with them. It's easy to talk with teachers. Students get along well with teachers. Teachers at my school help us with our problems. My teachers care about me. My teacher makes me feel good about myself.
Wow.
If you can do that as a parent, I think you will do a lot of the things that are helpful for a teen. And give the teen the opportunity to do the things they want to do within limits, of course, but to be there as they learn. And so I think, you know, and that's also highly related to a lot of other things in the school. So if the kids feel comfortable with the teachers, think the teachers care about them, then they see the rules of the school as equitable and fair. They don't feel people are being discriminated against. The school has a good climate. And there's a lot of research that shows schools with good climates have lowered rates of depression. They don't have as much drug use. So I think this is part of what a community should try to do, is take what we know is good about parenting and put it into the schools so that the teachers, do the same things that good parents do.
Yeah.
And not make it a place of discipline that is arbitrary and discriminatory in some cases and unhelpful. And if a school can be like that, in addition to giving kids opportunities like not just academics, but things like drama and music and extracurricular things, I think that makes schools really an inviting place for young people to be, and allow them to flourish a lot more than they might otherwise. So that's how I think of it. I mean,
yeah, no, it's cool because if you think about it, there's 30 kids per class, and if a teacher has that effect on one student in amongst the 30, that's actually pretty incredible to sort of see. And we see parents, they have at most six kids in a family at most so far that we know of. That's pretty common, but like there's that access to be able to see, okay, if one kid in 32 and 30 in a class is able to make themselves feel so good with that one teacher, then for sure a parent can sort of have that same effect if sort of opening that same barrier that teachers were able to open up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting statistic.
Yeah, it sounds very obvious in many ways, but it's not the way schools are necessarily organized today.
No.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that schools and parents can sort of teach each other, but there's always a barrier between the two that sort of have a lot of conflict with how they are with the children. And I think there's two different ways that parents are with the child and then the teachers are with the child, which is fair. It should be, like you said, it should be obvious, but it really isn't. Now, when it comes to some of your practices that you do yourself, what is a practice that you do to sort of encourage risky behavior in yourself that you try, but also knowing the limit for yourself that you know which is harmful and which is, pretty much, okay, it's a normal thing for you to try?
Oh, you mean in my own life?
Yes.
So I've been around a long time, and at this point in my life, I don't know that there's very much that I do that's all that risky. Especially with the pandemic, I've been home. I've only gone in one day a week because I'm afraid of getting COVID.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of held me back in a lot of ways. I haven't gone to any professional meetings. I'm doing my first plane flight since the pandemic this December. I haven't flown once. Mm-hmm. And that's partly because I think my wife is like even more concerned than I am. So, I think I have to get over my concerns about being risky in the context of what's happened with the pandemic. And so I've tried to, like we live 2 hours away from New York City. And we used to go to New York City all the time and go to plays and do all that kind of stuff. We haven't done that in like 3 years. It's like because we're worried, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And, I'm realizing that I shouldn't do that. I should be thinking a lot more about enjoying life and doing things that are a little risky, but, at the same time, probably good for me.
Yeah, no, I think I've had a lot of people, especially like a lot of my grandparents, they're still very much afraid of sort of doing the same things that they used to do or enjoying the same situations that they used to do. And honestly, there's things to be scared of, obviously. There's always, especially now that we are a lot more aware of situations where I think I was also very scared about flying by myself or flying places or doing things that I usually would do, because after that, I mean, it's not an unusual fear. I don't think I will never say that it's an unusual thing, because it's such a common thing now to be afraid of. But yeah, no, the flight, when you go fly in December, I'm sure it'll all be fine. I think it's going to be, it's great to sort of try to experience the world again. I think there's a whole lot of things that is great to sort of look into. So no, that sounds like an exciting first flight, which is going to be great.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I should get over that. But the other thought is I have to do, I have to stop it, and I have to do 2 flights to get there, and so I got to spend time in airports, and
Yeah.
not what I'm looking forward to. But yeah, so yeah, it's not a great story, but that's basically my story, at this point.
No, it's very common, actually. The amount of people that I've sort of had, and I've asked that question, that have the similar sort of risk. It's a very common fear to have. I think I flew to London, I think earlier this year, and that was my first flight. And it was like you, I had to go from Singapore to London and change flights and stay in airports and layovers, and it was very worrisome at the very beginning, but I was very careful. I think I'm a lot more cautious than I used to be. I think that's also because I was a whole lot younger before the pandemic sort of started. I was like 3 years ago, and I was willing to take risks. And now I'm like, okay, I'm a bit more aware of how the world is. So yeah, I just wore a mask the entire time. So all the flights and stuff, I just kept wearing one. So my mom was like, oh, just wear 2 masks, just be double protected. Which is very interesting. No, it's a very common thing, and it's not something that's so out of this place, which is great.
Oh, well, good. You're making me feel better.
Yes. It's fun. I'm here. I'm all good. It's a very common thing. So it's all good.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Now,
she's already told me wear double masks.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I did. I was still very scared because I was unsure about how another country would sort of be dealing with it, but it all ended up being fine in the end. So yeah. Now, I want to thank you so much, Dan, for joining me on the show today and for talking about adolescent risky behaviors and sort of talking about a lot of the stereotypes that teenagers face, and also how parents can sort of manage their child's autonomy to a lot of things and help encourage the experience while also standing by and allowing them to fall back on a parent if something should go wrong. So I think, thank you so much for being a part of the show and for talking about this. I think hearing your expertise is pretty incredible to know. Now, I was wondering if our listeners wanted to find out a little bit more about you. Is there a place that they are able to head on to?
Well, I mean, most of the things about me online are, my publications. So, Google Scholar. The Policy Center has a place for me that shows, what I do and sort of the work I've done. So there's those things. And of course you can Google me, and lots of things will pop up. But yeah, that's basically, I hate to plug Google, but I do use Google a lot.
Oh, same here. Don't worry.
Although I didn't have Chrome, but now I have Chrome.
Now you have it. There you go.
I'm good. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining me on the show again. It's been amazing talking to you.
Oh, it's been fun talking to you too. You're a joy. You really are.
Oh, thank you.
And good luck with the show. I think it's wonderful. And I look forward to, I did watch one episode with David Hawkins, and that was very interesting because he's done a lot of great work. So that was fun to watch.
Yeah,
But,
no,
you
he's
know,
an interesting guest.
yeah, I'm going to take a look at some of your other, podcasts and see what's cooking there as well.
Oh, perfect. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for listening, and definitely go and check out some of Dan's work as well as read some of his publications, as I know that I was reading through some of them and some of them sound really incredible and really in depth as to what we're talking about today. So definitely hit on there if you want to know a little bit more. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.